Ben Goff sitting next to me. That is the amazing, the beautiful, the man that has hair, even though he was complaining about this morning. Peter Aylett from Cinema Buro and Officina Acustica. Peter, we have been without you for a little bit, but you are back. You had mentioned, Ben, that you wanted to come back. I always welcome you to come back. And I think this is a great topic for you because, one, it resonates with a lot of people. And two, the answer, there isn't a great answer for this. As you put it before we were talking, the answer is perhaps. So today's topic is, can you fix room issues with equipment? And the simple answer, as Peter put it, agree or not, is perhaps. So, Peter, you had something that you wanted to address, and you had specific things that I think you mentioned before this about wording things a specific way, and you had a reason to do that. So I will just let you start, and then we will see where today's conversation takes us.
As ever, it's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, you've had the awesome Ben recently, and now you've got me for a week. So let's see where this goes. Two things I want to talk about first. When we say fix a room and when we say equipment, let's just define what we mean by those two things. To fix a room, you've got to have a problem. And when you have a problem, I think the first step is identifying that problem. If it's, well, I just want to make it better, then I think that's a bit of a crapshoot. To me, once you've lived with something and you appreciate its capabilities across a wide variety of content, there's probably something that you're saying to yourself, that's the thing I'd like to make better. It could be you want it to be spatially better. You want it to feel more immersive. It could be you want more dynamics. It could be you want the bass to go deeper. There are a number of things it could be, but I think the first thing, and this radically affects what you then do about it, is don't just say, I've got some spare money, I've got a hole in my pocket and I want to spend that money. I'm just going to go out and spend some money. Identify specifically what it is you want to improve. The second thing is when we talk about equipment.
Well, before we move on to the second thing, why is it problematic? Like, what issues could you create in trying to do something before identifying a specific problem? Like, maybe you just say, as you said at the beginning, I just want to make it better, but you haven't identified what you're trying to address. What is something that can happen? We don't have to talk about everything, but what is something that can happen or commonly happens when that tact is taken?
To me, it's down to value. That there's certain things in a lot of rooms, not necessarily most rooms, but certain things in a lot of rooms where a little will go a long way. There'll be a fundamental problem. My 2-channel room is just a living space. It's not got a display in it. It's eclectically decorated. I live in a 120-year-old house in the UK, very, very conventional house. And that room is basically square. So I have this huge stacked up room mode at 47 hertz. And, to most people, you listen to the room and you go, oh, it sounds amazing. It's the best hi-fi system I've ever heard. And it's really, really good. But to me, I can hear what I've had to do in EQ to make that 47 hertz a little more palatable. My long-term plan is going to be to put some active bass absorbers in the room. But, I'm in contact with quite a few manufacturers and I want to make sure they're the right ones at the right price and critically in the right form factor for a room. So I could go out and get some cables. I could go out and get some power conditioning stuff. I could upgrade my subs. I could get bigger power amps to my speakers. I could spend some money on a DAC. I could do all manner of things to that room.
You could do all of those things.
I could do all of those things, but none of those things, absolutely none of those things will affect that 47 hertz stacked up length, width, height room mode. And that would, to me, and I'm the important person, it's my room, that to me dominates what I hear in that room. So, you can easily, if you just go, oh, I'm going to buy a piece of equipment and upgrade it. Will you hear a difference? Probably. Will it be the difference that makes the biggest difference in terms of your experience for the lowest possible cost? Perhaps. You might be lucky. But if you start off with, right, here is a hierarchy of things that I want to make better.
Yeah.
Number one, I want to fix that 47 hertz room mode. Number two, the next thing I might do, or this would be a domestic negotiation. I've currently got a pair of really, really good 8-inch subs in the room.
Hmm.
I'd really like a pair of 12s. I'd really like to quadruple the volume displacement capability I have in that room, which would then allow me to drive it a lot lower, a lot louder. That's a calculated, objective thing
Yeah.
that I know from an engineering perspective. If I do this, I'm going to achieve this result, rather than, well, will a DAC make a difference? Probably. Will it be profound? I doubt it.
So what I think I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if you're just upgrading or changing haphazardly, you don't really know what the end result is potentially going to be. I mean, you can have some idea. There is always the possibility that that issue could become worse depending on what the issue is and depending on what you do with it. And the more time instead that you spend in planning, defining, and figuring out, the more you can potentially save and the more targeted you can be with any direction you try and go.
Absolutely, and let's keep it two channel, because I think there's some easier analogies here.
I would agree with that.
Manufacturers are very, 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 very good about talking about their equipment and making what they make unique.
Yeah.
So when they talk about what they do, they can explain certain features, certain materials, a heritage, a name design, or something that you can't apply to any other equipment in that category. And often that's something that purchasers just lock onto. Oh, I really want that tweeter made of that material, or oh, I really like that loudspeaker designer, and that's fine. But it's not really, doesn't really tell you what's going to happen in the room. And I've been in this industry now for what, 35 years, 36 years. Started off in two channel, and if I knew now, holy crap, if I knew now what I knew, what I didn't know 36 years ago, I would have been able to go into a room, play some known material, get my microphone out, play some very, very simple test tones, and go, I know exactly how to give you the best bang for your buck. Now you want to make an upgrade. And the chances are it would have never have been a DAC. It would have never been an arm for a turntable. It would have never been some expensive interconnect cables. It will probably be, and I know we all get quite boring talking about this, it will probably be the room itself. It will probably be, let's sort acoustics out. And as I've probably said many times before, I'm not what I could call an acoustician. I don't have an academic background in acoustics, and I think you need to have that to call yourself an acoustician. I'm just a very experienced cinema and sort of listening room designer. And you don't, the idea of perfect doesn't exist in acoustics. You ask 10 people that do this kind of thing what perfect means, you're going to get 13 different answers. But the fundamentals, just the raw fundamentals of acoustics are really, really simple. Number one, an appropriate reflection decay time. So you might know that as an RT60 number. The R stands for reverberation. We don't call it reverberation because in small rooms, the kind of rooms we have, they're not big enough to be statistically reverberant. So you're still hearing specular individual reflections and how they decay. So it's more technically correct to say reflection decay time. The reflection decay time needs to be appropriate for the space, and appropriate changes on a number of factors: how big the space is, how many speakers you have in it, and what you're going to be using it for. That's really, really important. You don't want space to be too live, so all this energy just keeps rattling around in the room. And whilst you've got all this energy rattling around the room, too much energy, the energy that you want gets masked. So too high a reflection decay time is not good. Too low a reflection decay time is not good either, because we're really good with nature reflections. We've evolved, grown up. We understand reflections. Stick yourself in a room, blindfolded, total silence, stand there. You'll probably have a good idea of how big the room is and how it's furnished just by feeling the acoustics. But too damped is horrible. You get too much direct sound as opposed to reflected. The room feels oppressive. The room feels closed in. Spatially, it's not going to be very good. So you want an appropriate reflection decay time. And you also want a reflection decay time that's as linear as possible. So from low frequencies to high frequencies, when you measure it, it's not just one number. You measure it and effectively you get a line plotted. Now, it's always going to go up in the, well, not always, but most of the time it's going to go up in the base. And that's kind of fine. But the thing you don't want it doing is falling off a cliff at high frequencies. And that's very easy to do if the whole thing's carpeted. You've got lots of soft furnishings. And for some reason that or other, you've decided to put 1-inch absorption all over the room. Have you acoustically treated your room? Well, yeah, you've treated the patient and you've kind of killed it. At the same time, you've over-treated, just like with any drug. If you over-treat, you kill it. So that's number one. And the second thing that's really, really important. Now, actually, let's go back a bit. Reflection decay time. If you've got too much, it's really, really easy to play around with. Just go to IKEA or your local cheap store and just buy some polystyrene-filled bean bags, and stick them in the room and measure. Bring a few more in, stick them in the room, measure. Even just get some fold-up dining chairs, prop them up against the wall, put these things at certain position in the room, measure, listen, change. You'll get a really, really good idea of what's going on in the room, and it hardly costs you anything. And the interesting thing about this word treatment, acoustic treatment, is that if you have the opportunity, don't build the room to be sick in the first place. You know, a treatment is a very after the fact thing. You know, I wouldn't build a dedicated room and consider that I'm then treating the room. I'd build a dedicated room and go, well, I have integrated acoustics into the space. So acoustics in terms of can equipment fix your room? Absolutely. And it tends to be the best bang for the buck to improve a room. And it's also the platform. It's kind of the foundation to which other upgrades sit on. If you've made other upgrades, but your acoustics are still marginal, you're kind of chasing your tail. It's going to be really, really difficult to build on that foundation. So can equipment fix a space? Yeah, if that equipment is acoustics. And as ever, the recommendation for acoustics is to read the fabulous Floyd Toole's new edition of Sound Reproduction. And in that book, he talks about the acoustic treatments of life. So a rug, a carpet, a sofa, curtains. If you've got these things already in your room, you're probably fine in terms of raw absorption, just like I am with my 2-channel listening room. My problem isn't that I need diffusers and absorbers and stuff on the wall. I've got stuff in the room that's doing that job. My problem is the room's square. So I then get that big room mode at 47 hertz. That means I have to do something about it. So yeah, acoustical stuff can make rooms much, much better.
I want to make sure that people understand what Peter just said, and that is he's saying that you can fix it with equipment, probably, but the equipment that we're referring to right now is more or less furniture or things in the room, or I'm going to call them analog. They're not electronics. And that's where I want to go next, is because this comes up all the time on forums. It comes up all the time on things like Facebook groups, Reddit, anywhere that enthusiasts come together. They're like, I want to switch from X, Y, or Z EQ platform to something else. And now we're moving into, and the industry is pushing more and more towards active acoustics. Peter, you mentioned this at the beginning with active bass absorbers and such. What can those fix issues? I think the same answer is going to come about as perhaps, but even when they do fix them, can they create other issues along the way?
The I'm going to use a very high convoluted phrase here, and rather than call it EQ, I'm going to call it electroacoustic optimization, because you're really what you're doing is you're applying stuff
Mhm.
to make the interface between the loudspeaker and the room different. You're not treating the room. You can't treat the room. All you can do is change the signal that's coming out of the loudspeakers so that either each individual speaker is doing something, or as some of the new systems do, speakers work in combination to do something. So electroacoustic optimization, again, the answer is it depends, and it goes back to my first comment of what is it you want to improve.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go back to my 2-channel room. I have a very sophisticated electroacoustic optimization processor in there, and I have that processor told, don't do anything at all above the room's transition frequency. And the room's transition frequency is the point in the frequency spectrum where, rather than the room dominating because of room modes, the speakers dominate because of their natural response and how they put sound into a room. And the speakers that I use in that room are very, very, very well behaved. So I have no EQ applied above about 300 hertz.
Yep.
It's not a brick wall. That would be a terrible thing to do. It's just do less and less and less. And by the time in my room you get to about 650 hertz, there's literally no correction going on
Now,
whatsoever.
why did you take that approach? Aside from the speakers being well behaved, what can happen if you do things like that? What can be perceivable?
This is a controversial statement when it comes to EQ, but nothing is free.
Yeah.
You can't.
I agree.
Nothing is free. The chances are, if you're making one thing better, you're making something else slightly worse. And I think one of the trickiest things when you're thinking about audio to get around it in your head is the difference between the frequency domain and the time domain.
Yep.
So the frequency domain, you play pink noise and you get this squiggly line, and its squiggliness depends on its resolution. So at 1-octave resolution, in other words, all the frequencies over an octave are averaged, and that's how the line's smoothed, compared to 48th octave, which means you take an octave, which is a doubling of frequency, so 300 to 600, 600 to 1200, those are octaves, and there will be 48 different points on that line. You could have a real squiggle. And that is the steady state magnitude frequency response of the system. And you can use EQ to turn certain frequencies up and down. Now, the second you turn a frequency up or down, that has a price possibly in the time domain. So the time domain is not talking about how loud is it as a certain frequency. When you look at that squiggly line, it's just saying frequencies of this are a little bit louder than frequencies of this, and frequencies of that are a lot softer.
Yeah.
And as you get into bass frequencies, that tends to be wild because of room modes. The fact that you have wavelengths fitting into a room, length, width, or height, and as they combine constructively, you get a peak.
Yep.
As they combine destructively, you get a dip. And higher up in frequencies, it's much more down to the performance of the loudspeaker. But that tells you what the tonality of the system is. That just gives you its frequency response. Time domain, that really tells you nothing about, okay, are all those frequencies arriving as pressure at your eardrum at the same time.
I think you said that frequency domain doesn't tell you anything about if they're arriving at the
No,
same time.
no.
You said time domain, so I wanna make sure that people are
Yeah. So
saying
we're now
understanding it
talking
correctly.
about time domain.
Yes.
We're not talking about what is arriving at your eardrum. We're talking about when
When.
it arrives. And there's this kind of expectation that, well, they all arrive at the same time, don't they? I mean, it's sound. All the frequencies travel through and arrive at my eardrums at the same time. Well, no. And that is the reason that we find live music, especially acoustic live music, so beautifully compelling,
Yep.
because there are no time domain errors. It is an acoustic source that's vibrating the air around it, that's then traveling through the air and vibrating our eardrums, and we hear sound. It's just so coherent. It's just so compelling. And I guarantee every single listener has done this. You're going to a brewery or a bar or a restaurant, and you walk up close and you can't see what's happening, and you go, "Oh, that's live music." Don't we?
Yeah.
We do. We just go, "That's live. That's live, that is." You're not telling that from the frequency response. You're not telling that from the dynamics. You're not telling that because of how loud it is. You're telling that because it's just so coherent in the time domain.
Well, is it you that says this, Peter? Nature has no time domain errors?
No, it's true.
Or is yeah.
Yeah. In nature, there are no time domain errors. There are no frequency domain errors, really.
No.
It's just that's what it sounds like. It's because it's recorded with multiple microphones, obviously. Have you noticed how a lot of audio file recordings, it's one microphone
Yeah.
or just a simple cross pair to get stereo? That's because, okay, there's, you're minimizing all the potential differences in time of all this different information then being encoded into 2 or 5 or 7 or object based or whatever it is. Then you've got analog to digital converters, which add time domain error. You've then got digital, which, depending on the resolution, adds time domain error. Sometimes you've then got decoding, and you've got more decoding. And this is the reason I haven't applied that EQ. Every time you apply EQ, it's adding small delays at certain frequencies because of the filter you've used. So does it mean I have no time domain errors? Absolutely not. There's still loads, because the fact it's recorded music, but I'm not sticking more on the end. And the advice always 100%, this is not an it depends. This is a hard and dry. Try to optimize things in the physical domain
Yep.
before you then try and fix it digitally or analog using EQ.
As I like to say, fix the room before you deal with the equipment.
Yeah,
Fix
fix
the
the room.
analog before you fix the digital realm.
Fix how the speakers are mounted. Fix what direction the speakers are facing. Don't assume that, well, you need to point them towards you, or don't. Oh, someone once said I need to always crossfire my speakers. There's a different ideal solution for every single room and combination of speakers.
Yeah.
But that needs to be considered. So sometimes you've got problems that you need to fix with some EQ. My particular speakers in my particular room, they just work. I don't really need any EQ above the transition frequency. Tonally, they're lovely.
Yeah.
Frequency response, there's a few bumps, but I kind of don't care. You're
You'd be
always gonna
surprised at how much you can get away with, as you would call the squiggles, and the human mind and ear is pretty forgiving in the frequency domain. I think people don't realize how unforgiving it can be and how astute we can be in the time domain. But for some reason, enthusiasts have a tendency to hyper focus, and professionals in the industry have a tendency to hyper focus on that squiggly line.
Yep. And the other hidden danger of that squiggly line is if you're doing cuts, you're in a much better place than if you're doing boosts.
Hmm.
Because if you're doing a boost, let's say you apply a filter It's parametric EQ at 3K, and it's got a Q of 1.5, so it's reasonably gentle, but you can see it as sort of a spike like
Can you
that.
define what Q is real quick for people that don't know?
Yeah, if you consider that when you apply a boost to the frequency, there are three parameters. There is the frequency center point,
Yep.
so it's the center of the bell curve, if you like. There is the magnitude, so how much you're boosting or cutting, and then there's the Q. So I'll try and do it with my fingers. That would be high Q, and then as I'm spreading it out, that would be much lower Q. So a Q, a low Q, a small number, is a very broad, gentle EQ over a wide variety of frequencies. A high Q is really, really spiky. And
Targeted. Specific.
generally, the higher the Q, the more it screws with your time domain.
And would I be correct in saying that the higher the Q, typically, the easier it is to notice? In a lot of situations.
No, we're as you say, quite forgiving of those spikes. It's not strictly true. I mean, so no one go, oh, well, that's not true, Peter. But our frequency resolution, unless you're a very, very, very high trained listener, is
Mhm.
somewhere between about a third and a sixth octave.
Okay.
And I don't know, if you've ever used Room EQ Wizard for smoothing. There's a function that says psychoacoustic, and that best kind of represents what we can hear. Now, if you take 48th octave, which is going to be really spiky, and smooth that to a third octave, it's going to be much smoother. You then smooth that to psychoacoustic, and it slightly changes the smoothing across the frequency spectrum, but you're going to end up with something that's reasonably smooth. And I think one mistake that people make in EQ is chasing the high Q spikes.
Yeah.
Putting maybe 7 different filters in just to get rid of this really, really high Q spike. Will it get rid of it? Sure, but all of the time domain things that you've done with all of those filters stacked on top of each other, it's not something that is audible or particularly measurable. You can begin to measure it with all these things arriving at the wrong time. It's subtle, but to me that subtleness makes the difference in a system sounding, yeah, this is nice, it's fairly accurate, whatever that means. But have you noticed that some systems, even if they're a bit boomy, even if they're a bit bright,
Mhm.
even if the tonality is a bit off, over a long period of time, they're just really easy to listen to.
Yeah.
And that's because your brain isn't having to do any processing. It's like this is why live music is so easy to listen to, because your brain's not having to process around those time domain errors. You add loads of time domain errors, your brain is actually having to work harder. It's having to figure out, oh, what's going on? When did I hear that? Have I heard it before? It's fatiguing, and some of that is down to acoustics,
Yep.
and some of that is down to loudspeaker design. And I know you and Ben have talked a lot about the importance of a really, really smooth off-axis response.
Mhm.
And that's part of something not sounding fatiguing. If your brain is having to filter out between what it needs to listen to versus, a sound arriving 20 milliseconds, 25 milliseconds later, and it processing it rather than spectrally that being very similar and the brain ignoring it, well, it's just working harder. And this is the case with time domains. So don't chase gentle tonality changes. If you're using LCRs, screen channel are one type of speaker, surrounds are another type of speaker, tops are another type of speaker, you might want to do some sort of gentle, broad tonality adjustments so they all sound basically the same. But at the end of the day, let's say your front screen channel speakers are three-way Dapolitos used vertically. Let's say your surrounds are two-way used vertically, and let's say your tops, your in ceiling, are concentric, sort of in wall in ceiling. Well, those three speakers are going to have very, very, very different dispersions into the room.
Yep.
They're going to have very, very, very different phase responses. And you're not going to be able to get everything the same by just using magnitude response correction, because their phase response is going to be fundamentally different. And when I say phase response, some manufacturers put out this data. They will show effectively, as frequency changes, how those sounds are delayed. Now, we're reasonably tolerant of that, but let's say it's a Dolby Atmos track, and you can have an image in space, if it's a true object, potentially being represented by three speakers. You've got this triangle of speakers representing that sound. If those three speakers are all different, it kind of makes no difference if they look the same on a magnitude response plot. If the frequency response is identical, they will have different phase response, and it's just not going to sound real, because it's coming out of one speaker. Okay, sounds pretty good. You've imaged between three different speakers. It's just not going to. And this goes back to fixing it in the physical domain. So, not going, oh, it's fine, I've got all these different speakers, my processor will sort it out. If you can do, every single speaker in the room should be identical, not just from the same brand, not just from the same range, but identical.
The exact same.
That's really, pardon my language, that's really fucking hard to do. I mean, crikey, I've never built a room where that's the case. But what I always do is, when I'm speccing the different speakers, you look at their phase responses and go, is this something that is the same? If it's not, can my processor, with its electroacoustic optimization, begin to adjust the phase response? So the processor then isn't trying to adjust frequency, it's trying to adjust phase. So it's not adjusting how loud all those different frequencies are. It's trying to make sure that all the different frequencies are going to arrive at my ears at the same time. And not all electroacoustic optimization does time domain correction. Some of it's all frequency. And if you can do that manually. If you have a processor that gives you lots of different filter options, then it's possible to do that manually, but it's really, really time consuming.
Yeah. And there's a lot of granularity that has to happen with that. There's a lot that has to happen with that. But to reiterate, if you were to address this by using the exact same speaker in every given position, this becomes less problematic. You're fixing them in the analog and not compromising, then trying to fix it in the digital realm.
Yeah, we've got a room in preliminary design at the moment, and when I asked Ben to do this 3 or 4 months ago, he looked at me and went, "Oh, Peter, you bastard." But I've asked Ben, because it's kind of a classic Ben go down an engineering rabbit hole that probably no one else on the planet has ever done. I've challenged Ben to design this system so above around 150 hertz, we need to apply 0 magnitude response EQ to it.
Yeah.
The whole thing. And it's a really, really, really challenging ask. But I think a room like that would sound stunning.
It would.
EQ is great. It's a beautiful thing. But if you think you've pressed the auto magic button with your one random microphone in a load of random positions, and it comes out with a result, and it will sound different. If you think, oh, it's good, it's got to sound better, hasn't it? Then that's good psychology overriding good engineering. just because the processor thinks it's better doesn't necessarily mean it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is this measure, listen, adjust, measure, listen, adjust, measure, listen, measure, listen, adjust. And don't be afraid of listening. Really, don't be afraid of listening. So yeah, electroacoustic optimization is essential, because you basically always need it for bass.
Yeah.
You always need it for bass. You just can't get away with it. And things like Dirac art, Trinov waveforming, couple of other things that are upcoming in the same area, they've changed the perspective on room design. But the other thing with both art and definitely waveforming, neither of them are additions. Neither, even art that's sold as, oh, just enable it and it will be better, isn't necessarily the case.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you need with art is bandwidth, is overhead, is headroom, especially in the subwoofers,
Yep.
because you're asking those subwoofers, as well as to reproduce frequencies, to work together in a really, really clever way to cancel out the things that you don't want to happen. So they're working to reproduce. And if they've got no headroom, there's no more headroom left to work to do all the clever things it needs to do, cancelling out in the room. So, even art needs some consideration to make sure you've got enough headroom in the right speakers. And it's not just the subs if you want to go more
Yeah.
sophisticated.
And if
with
you
that.
don't do that, but you tell Dirac art that it has more headroom than you actually have, it can have some pretty catastrophic results, resulting in speakers saying, yeah, I'm not going to do anything anymore. And that speaker eventually fails.
Ever
So
again.
just this is the point of, you need to look at it as the sum of its parts. Look at it as, hey, I want Dirac art and I want it to be able to do this. I need to make sure that everything else can keep up and deliver what I'm trying to ask it to do, instead of just layering all of these things on without looking at how they implement and work with one another in a system.
Yeah.
So, yes,
It's
electronics can make a positive influence, but you do need to make sure that fundamentally you address as many things as possible as you can from the start.
Here's another analogy, and it's really, really easy to see. On every display device, you've got this slider that says sharpness.
Mhm.
Well, just like brightness is nothing to do with brightness, and contrast has very little to do with contrast, sharpness has nothing to do with sharpness. Sharpness really is edge enhancement. So the display device is looking where there's a difference between something really light and really dark and artificially enhancing that, because we perceive contrast as nice clean edges between light and dark. You generally need some sharpness applied, but once you apply too much, you begin to see artifacts.
Yep.
You begin to see lines where there shouldn't be lines. It looks nasty. And it's the same with audio. Often with audio, we need a little bit of really, really subtle EQ. But once you go too far, you're gonna begin to hear the effects of it. You can't just stack filters on top of filters on top of filters, and expect there to not be any negative effects. I deeply believe that there are.
I agree with that. Is there anything else that you find as common pitfalls in this particular topic that enthusiasts, professionals commonly find themselves going up against?
More money does not necessarily equal better performance.
More money does not mean more better?
Not necessarily. It
Yeah.
might do, but it often doesn't. And it goes back to my original comment that if you're going to fix something, you need to identify what's broken. And
Mhm.
once you've identified what's broken, you can then go down the right, what is the most cost effective, highest value thing to fix that. Ben's talked about it quite a lot. It's about to get lots of publicity because it's shortlisted for a CEDIA award. But we've recently finished a huge project in Southeast Asia. And if the customer had come to us and said, okay, here's another $500,000, make it better, our reply would have been, We don't know how. We can make it different, but genuinely, hand on heart, with another $500,000 we don't know how you could have made that better. We could throw some, really expensive. It was already had some of the highest quality DACs available. It was, the cables were really good. We could have put more expensive cables on. Would it have been better? It might have been a bit different, but it wouldn't have necessarily been better. Now, those rooms are very, very few and far between, really few and far between. And it's a reality that when you're building a room from scratch, there are the fixed things, and then there are the things you can change. The fixed things are the structure of the room itself. You're not going to want to upgrade that ever, really. So if you want isolation, spend the money on the isolation. You can always upgrade equipment in the future. Isolation's really hard. Then you come and layer in, so the interior of the room, the acoustics, and interiors matter. To me, when we talk about our most memorable cinematic experiences, we're not going to describe a memorable cinematic experience because the room was beautiful. We're going to describe that because ultimately the room just disappeared into the background.
Didn't get in the way.
So rooms absolutely need to look beautiful when you walk in. They need to make you smile when you walk in. But during the movie, if it's the room that you're remembering, if it's the thing you remember about that experience, I'd question your design decisions. So it's important to get the room right, and the acoustics shouldn't be acoustic treatments. I can't stand the phrase. There are many really, really great acoustical products, and this is just stuff that you can put in a room that has a known set of performance parameters. So, that's the only difference between an acoustic treatment and something random. That with an acoustic treatment, you've got something to base some calculations on. Or if it's a complete system for doing the room, so you can't buy the elements individually, then that system builder should be able to tell you, here are the high level targets I'm aiming for. But that engineered acoustics have numbers attached to it, other things don't. So an acoustic treatment is a sofa. A sofa is an acoustic treatment. A bookcase is an acoustic treatment. A pot of plants is an acoustic treatment. An acoustic treatment is anything that changes the acoustics of the room, which is everything. Everything is an acoustic
including
treatment.
You,
including me. And some of us who drink too much beer more than others. But the point is, and I've acoustically treated my room. Well, of course you have. Every room's got acoustic stuff in it. Have you done that correctly is a different conversation. And the crazy thing about acoustics, I know I keep going on about it, but it is the foundation, is there's nothing else in that room that you've engineered yourself. You haven't designed your loudspeaker, probably. You haven't designed your amplifier, probably. I'd say certainly you've not designed your processor. Certainly you've not designed your projector or video processor. So why do we rely on people to design and engineer the single most important thing in the room, which is the acoustics?
Yeah.
You can't just throw random drive units into a random box with a random crossover and say, I've given you a great speaker. You similarly can't throw random acoustic treatments into a room and expect to get the best result. You need to start with the simple targets that I was talking about earlier. If you want to read more on that, download RP22 from the CEDIA website. It's all explained in quite a lot of detail in there. You need to start with acoustical targets and work towards those targets. So can you fix a room with equipment? Yeah, with acoustics. That's probably going to be the most noticeable. And everything else, it just depends what's broken. Can you fix bad bass? Well, bad bass, really bad bass, is unlikely to be your equipment. It's more likely to be how you're using your equipment. Here's something I see all the time, and I'd like to think the listeners of your podcast don't do this, but I've seen a lot of systems that have this done. If you have a subwoofer that has a crossover in it, and you have an AV processor that has a crossover in it, please don't set them both to 80 hertz.
Mm-hmm.
If your AV processor is already doing that crossover, your subwoofer's crossover should be on bypass. So, it's often not can equipment fix problems, it's can how the equipment is being used. And often that's free. That's just free to fix. You more often than not, it's not about buying new stuff. It's about let's use the stuff you've got as good as you possibly can do. And once you're doing that, then go, right, I want better dynamics. Okay. That's going to be expensive because I'm going to need to change my speakers and my subs and my amplifiers. I want, better immersion. Well, there's a load of reasons why immersion isn't necessarily good. That might be acoustics, or, it might be changing your seating positions. It might be it might be changing your speaker positions.
Right.
Try and optimize what you've got before you instantly go out and spend more money. And then when you spend more money, there's a hierarchy. Acoustic, let's talk about just audio for now, and then we'll
Sure.
come on to video. Acoustics are going to make the best fundamental difference. Then it's probably loudspeakers and subs. And when you're talking about better, again, if you read RP22, we've split performance down into 3. We've split it down into spatial, dynamic, and timbre. Spatial is how it renders spatially, how immersed you feel spatially. Dynamics, well, that's the difference between loud and soft, and often a really, 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 really great upgrade if you can. One of the best audio upgrades you can possibly make the room really quiet.
Yeah.
And that often includes getting the projector out of the room.
So, funnily enough, you and I talked about that we're potentially planning on building a new house. This is the primary reason for doing a new cinema, is getting the room quieter. That is the primary issue that I have with my current room, is I cannot get the projector out of the room. I cannot overstate this, that what Peter is saying, getting the dynamics right in a space can increase immersion exponentially. You may not realize how important quiet is, and I would argue that the reason you feel that way is because you have not experienced it in a cinematic experience. It is transformative. Quiet is just as important as how loud can I get, if not more. Because the quieter you can get, I would say, the less loud you have to have an immersive experience.
Completely. And the other benefit of quiet is that quiet rooms sound so much bigger.
Oh,
Because all of those little low level cues,
mhm.
you're watching an episode of Yellowstone streamed, doesn't matter. And those scenes where they're out in the wilds of, is it Montana? And you've just got atmosphere, you've got wind, you've got leaves, you've got horses, you've got people walking. Those are really, really quiet recorded bits. And if the noise in your room is masking those, in other words, and in hearing, we have this effect called masking. And masking is what MP3 and most compression does. It basically says, well, when there's loud bits, throw away the soft bits. We don't need them anymore because we're never going to hear them. And it's exactly the same in the physical domain, that when you've got loud bits, you're never going to hear the soft bits. And
Yep.
your projector noise is likely really, really loud compared to the soft bits being reproduced. So it makes rooms feel vast, makes soundtracks seem detailed and spacious. Scenes where deliberately it's really, really quiet. The scene as the bomb goes off in Civil War is a brilliant demonstration for that. It's noisy, 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 civil disturbance, riot, bomb goes off, and then there's none of this stupid fake tinnitus. It's silence for about a minute and a half, and you're sitting there gripping your seat. It's deliberate tension, and quiet brings that to you. So yeah, do whatever you can to make your room really, really quiet.
You can't
I
fix that
want
with
to
equipment.
respond to a question.
Yeah.
The question is from Hyde Opalescent, and it says, isn't that blaming the tool for user error? I notice you don't differentiate between in-room measurement versus anechoic. Very different things when judging how smooth a frequency response is. Yes, yes, and no. When anechoic measurements are what speaker manufacturers kind of used to use, and the bigger ones still do, you're I'm not saying anechoic measurement is devalued. It absolutely isn't. It is the gold standard.
It is important.
But these days, with a clip or near field scanner, you can do almost everything you could do in an anechoic chamber in just a fairly normal room. And what those measurements are doing is to make sure the speaker is engineered correctly. That speaker has got all the right, I'm not going to go into speaker design, all the right characteristics for a speaker, including really, really smooth off-axis response. Those will be the anechoic measurements. You then buy that speaker, and there's nothing you can do to change the speaker. The speaker is what it is. It might have an external crossover with some recommended settings. Those settings are based on the anechoic measurements. I recommend, unless you really know what you're doing, use those settings. But you're given a loudspeaker. Those anechoic measurements then almost get forgotten about. You then need to know, well, with the speaker in the room, what's it doing? So yeah, anechoic measurements or clip or near field scanner measurements or manual measurements with the speaker outdoors up on a big pole with loads of bean bags on your parking lot floor. Those are critical in developing a really, really good speaker. But once you're in a room, you can almost forget about them, and you just need to focus on what's that speaker doing in that room, mounted the way that it's mounted, with all of the things around it that's going to affect the way it puts sound out into a room.
Yeah. I'd like to look at it as anechoic clipple measurements. They're great for just trying to figure out when you're designing a room, what tool do I need to use to overcome X, Y, or Z problem? Because I need to understand fundamentally at a baseline level how that speaker behaves. And then once I put it in the room, I'm left with how it behaves in that room and how it's interacting with the room. So trying to base changes and stuff on those anechoic measurements kind of goes out the window because now the room is the dominant factor.
I mean, you can, if you're getting some odd results, and that manufacturer actually, or there's a good third party source of those measurements, and you look at those measurements and you go, this actually explains some of the in-room results I'm getting.
Sure.
Then those measurements are useful, but they're never measurements that you're probably going to do. They're measurements that are generally supplied to you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. My argument, though, is that you should, if you're designing a room from scratch, try and identify as much of that before it goes into the room as possible. I would fully agree that after the fact, if you're trying to address now as an enthusiast what a speaker or what issue you may be doing, anechoic can still be a valuable tool to figure out, hey, how is this speaker behaving? What is it actually trying to do? And then correlating that to what it's doing in the room and trying to draw some inferences to figure out what's going on. So I get what Haida placement, Haida Palisant is saying, but I think it's important to look at it in both ways.
Yeah,
Glass
no,
half full and glass half empty.
I wanted to answer it because it's a really good comment that
Yeah.
it is important, and you should be aware of the idiosyncrasies of that particular speaker because it might help you fix what you can fix. But coming back to the hierarchy, or sorry,
No, go ahead. No,
coming back
I
to the
was going to ask
hierarchy,
you what else we were going to talk about. So this is good.
You've got the
Mhm.
room, which includes making the room quiet, which is really, really good. The next thing that's going to make the biggest difference is the speakers. But then you often can't just look at speakers. You've often got to look at amps. So
I'd say look at the speaker system is what I would.
exactly. And then you've got processor,
Mhm.
which is potentially going to make a vast difference. I'm often asked, which particular electro acoustic optimization system I prefer,
It's a
and it's
mouthful.
pretty public knowledge which one I use. And the reason I use it is, I think it's the best for the projects that we do, and a massive part of that is I understand it deeply. I've been using it for the past 11, 12 years. I'm not gonna, I'm not, I'm a really, really, really good calibrator with this particular processor. I'm not a professional calibrator like someone like Adam Peltz, who, we use Adam on some systems that we didn't do because I don't understand how Maya Sound Galaxy works. I don't understand the vagueness of the DSP in this particular power amp that I've never used. Adam's been there, seen it, and done it all.
Mhm.
I just don't have the time, and most people don't. So the answer to that is I think the best one is the one that you know is going to do what you want it to do. And then if you then have a choice between two or three, it's going to be the one that you know how to drive, its idiosyncrasies. You can go, this is what I want to achieve with it.
Mhm.
This is how I'm going to achieve it. Because I think it's like any engineering exercise. Um, a designer is a problem seeker, an engineer is a problem solver, and engineers are really, really good at solving the wrong problems.
Hmm.
So there's got to be an element of design that happens first. Here is the problem I have. I'm going to state the problem. I want more bass extension. Well, you're going to need more volume displacement then. So you're going to need more and bigger subs. You're probably going to need more powerful amplification. That's a structured, objective engineering conversation.
Mhm.
Just going, I want it to be better. You better is so many different things. So room, speaker system, which including the amps, processor, which is going to make a profound difference, and then source components matter hugely. You're only
Can
going to
only
get
be as good
out
as the source.
what you get in. So if you're seriously into movies, a kaleidoscope is probably the only
Especially with the
ration,
K.
rational choice. It is day to day, apart from DCI content, the highest quality input you can have into your system. And the difference between, in audio, between what Kaleidoscope puts out and what most streaming services put out is very, very, very noticeable. So that's, can equipment fix your room? Well, it's not going to fix the room, but it's going to make the experience much better. And then you get into, what I would call second and third tier upgrade things. DAX. Do DAX make a difference? Sure, DAX make a difference, but not as much of a difference as everything else I've mentioned. So if everything else I've mentioned, you've gone, this is all great, not really sure how I can make this better within my budget, then you can look at DAX as the next step. But if the cost of the DAX would be the cost of getting some acoustic stuff sorted instead, do the acoustics first.
And I wanna
Give
take this
yourself that
back to
baseline.
looking at the everything as a system. Let's say you're going down and now you're getting into the tier 3 and tier 2 and tier 3 and tier 4 things. If you don't look at your setup as a system and you start trying to figure out, "Oh, could a DAC make a difference?" But you haven't addressed the room itself and the room isn't quieter for you to notice these nuanced differences, you're kinda throwing money into the void at that point because your room is going to hold you back from being able to potentially hear or experience any of those differences that upgrading those other pieces of equipment may allow you to have. So you need to look at the system as a whole and start with the fundamentals. Start with the room. Start with the analog before you start throwing all of this stuff on top of it. If you don't have a good foundation, you're not going to allow or support everything that you start putting on top of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's the same with cables. I mean, we could do 5 episodes talking about cables. Do analog cables make a difference? Yeah, they do make a difference. They have a combination of resistance, inductance, and capacitance. And resistance, inductance as a capacitance is a component between your amplifier output and your speaker input. So they will make a difference. Whether more expensive cables are better than less expensive cables, I think, as your coat hanger demo
Mm.
once showed, Ryan, not necessarily. You know, I always say that if two speaker cables sound different from each other, what that means is one is more broken than the other in the context of that system.
Yeah.
Same with interconnect cables. Digital cables, it's a slightly different conversation. Huge amount of debate over digital, but the cables have got to be the right cables. With digital, you've got to have enough bandwidth. They've got to be well shielded. They've got to be, you know, flexible. So as you bend an HDMI cable around a corner, you're
Hmm.
not completely crucifying its bandwidth. So much of what great HDMI cables are, you know, it's nothing to do with materials. It's just the mechanical, physical geometry of the cable and how stable it is when you bend it. So and power as well. Power makes a difference. This aforementioned project in Southeast Asia, there's, you know, a healthy 6 figures worth of power stuff. We've got big isolation toroidal transformers basically powering everything. So all of the high frequency nasties that's in the mains with those toroidals gets filtered out, and we have really, really nice, clean, stable, and critically low impedance power. You can't just go putting computer UPSs on power amps, because you're going to make the power amp sound worse. A lot of UPSs out there, they're designed for steady state current from a piece of IT equipment, not from the very, very dynamic power requirements, especially from today's Class D amplifiers. So yeah, power is important, but only when you've got your fundamentals sorted. Equipment support, it matters. Some
Hmm.
electronics are mildly microphonic. You shake them at certain frequencies, their electrical characteristic is gonna slightly change. There's a Facebook group, hi-fi related. I've forgotten what it's called. I haven't been there for years. It was pretty good at the time. It was something like everything matters. And the whole point of the discussion, when someone says, "Oh, does this make a difference?" It's everything makes a difference. Everything makes a difference. The temperature in the room makes a difference. The indoor air quality makes a difference. How sealed the room is and the CO2 level in the room makes a difference. Humidity level makes a difference. If there's a nasty odor in the room, it makes a difference.
Hmm.
The feel of the carpet or the floor under your feet, how comfortable you are, how sweaty you feel, everything makes a difference. But in terms of, you've got some money to spend, what's the hierarchy? It's room first, then loudspeaker system, then processor, then source component, with everything else coming after.
Underneath. All right, a couple questions, Peter, and then we can wrap this up. So SDE Kelly 1980 says, "Is there?" This was you talking about your square room. This is when this one came in. Is there a desired length and width for a single row room that minimizes the nulls you get? Same question for 2 rows, etc. I've tried playing around with the Excel room mode calculator, but it's eh. So, is there a ideal's hard, but is there a good starting point that you would tell people to look for?
There's lots of different research papers and different ideas. The nicest one I've ever seen is, there is a really simple calculator on the internet. It's called AMROC, AMROC, and the URL is amacoustics.com/tools. It's called AMROC. If you just Google AMROC, AMROC, room modes, the calculator will pop up. And what it gives you is something called a Bonello ratio. And a Bonello ratio is how many room modes you have per octave. Now, what you don't want is lots and lots of room modes to stack up against each other, which is the problem that I've got. Because the room is square, all of the room modes for length, width, and height are identical. So the idea is that you're spreading these modes out so ones don't stack up on top of each other. And if you use that calculator and get a nice smooth Bonello ratio, that's your answer.
Good suggestion. Finding the correct tool for the job to hopefully fix things in the design before you drive your first screw or nail. That's where you want to do the majority of this. Caboose 515 says, I have a Klipsch R605 FA towers and my screen is only 1.2 inches from a door that goes out to my deck. So the speakers currently block it. What can I do to use that door without having to move it?
I'd need a lot more information on
Caboose,
the room.
what I would do in that situation, send an email to myself and Ben, or to Ben, and then we can try to address that. Questions like this just need way more information than what can be brought up in a stream. So it's best to have a conversation about it and make some suggestions and go from there.
If you're on a forum and you ask a question, I've got this. What speaker should I get to upgrade it? If anyone ever comes back to you with any suggestion of any description of any brand or specific speaker, ignore it. Ignore it. It's, what people usually say is, this is what I've got and it works, and they suggest that, or they're just pulling something out of an orifice. In order to make suggestions for pretty much every single question that ever comes up, if it's a pure science and engineering question, that can be answered. If it's I've got this, what should I do? Generally, we need a lot more information, because the answer is always, it depends on your specific scenario. There's rarely an if this then that answer to anything in this world.
And I think Peter will agree with this, that the people you do want to listen to when you ask those questions are the people that didn't turn around and ask you questions to try and get more information.
Yeah.
Because people need to understand the problem in a very large and encompassing way to be able to even begin to make suggestions on what you should do. And a big part of that is understanding the room and your expectations for what you're trying to achieve. And without knowing any of that, and you need a lot of information to be able to get there, how can you make a recommendation? It's not possible. All you can recommend is your own subjective experience. And that's not really beneficial to anybody that is asking these questions on a forum or in any mode. So fully agree with that. Last question, and this came up, Peter, when you brought up Kaleidoscape. Tom asks, recently got a Kaleidoscape Strato V. Maybe just my imagination, but audio sounds even a little better than my 4K Blu-ray. Is that even possible? I say this all the time, but so I'll let Peter speak to this. Yes, it is possible.
Yeah, it's possible. There's a lot more to digital audio than just the right ones and noughts.
Yes.
Just as we're talking about frequency versus time domain, if you look at all those ones and noughts digital, the right ones and noughts arrive. Well, that's frequency. The trick is for them to arrive at the right time, not surrounded by a load of noise. And a kaleidoscape, one of the reasons that they're so expensive relatively to a Blu-ray player, I think a kaleidoscape's pretty good value for what it is, but it's a lot more expensive than the Blu-ray player because it's got some pretty serious engineering inside. And one of the things with digital is something called jitter, and jitter is right information at the wrong time. And there's also noise. Even though the ones and zeros are arriving on that channel, if there's also lots of noise, that noise can make its way into something else. So I don't think, given the same fundamental ones and noughts information, that it's ever going to be, oh, but this is night and day kind of thing. your description of sounds even a little better, I don't think that's unexpected, just because a kaleidoscope is a really, really, really well engineered source.
The other part of this is sometimes there can be actual fundamental differences in the tracks based on the mezzanine and what Kaleidoscape has gotten versus the Blu-ray. They can get things that were not ever released on Blu-ray. So there are actual differences in the files themselves sometimes. Sometimes they're the same. What Peter is saying is you're only as good as your source and what it's doing with the output. And if Kaleidoscape is doing something better, minimizing potential issues with that, error correction and HDMI can only do so much. Um, you're starting at a better foundational level than you would potentially otherwise. I can't say that it's always going to be different, but what I can say is it can be, and the psychological confidence that that can give you in knowing that what you're getting is potentially the best. People underestimate how freeing that can be and what that can do to increase your immersion level with content. When you're not worried about, could this be better? The amount of increased enjoyment
Yeah.
that you can have from freeing yourself, especially as an enthusiast, from all of that, those shackles, it's amazing. And Peter, I know you've experienced this. I experienced this in my own room. It's, I think, the number one quality that I've gotten to experience. I can sit down in my room and just go, I don't have to worry about anything. This is it. And I just get to fall into and enjoy whatever I'm being told and experiencing. And it's transformative. Some people like the journey. I want to experience the content at the end of the journey.
When, I know a phrase that's used a lot is end game. Is this end game? I think if you're talking about a level of objective performance, end game doesn't exist. It's a very, very vague term. But to me, end game is what you just described, Ryan.
Yes.
End game is you start watching a movie, you forget about the room, you forget about life, you forget about time, you're not looking at your watch.
Nope.
You just get drawn into the content. If that happens at any budget, in any room, to me that's endgame.
And I think that's an
You've
important
done your
point
job.
is this doesn't have to be expensive. It depends on the person. Sometimes with certain people, you've got to go down a certain threshold. Sometimes with others, it can happen relatively inexpensively. It depends on who you are and what that experience, what you need to have that experience. This is not me saying you have to spend obscene amounts of money to get there. You just need to define what do you need to get there and then make that happen and then have that experience.
Now, before we go, Mike Stevens 2397 has asked a really, really, really good question. I think that's the title
How does
of
it start? So I can put it up on screen.
it. Starts. It seems that everyone
Got it.
who speaks on acoustics eventually comes down to you can't get treatments right in the design stage, and that some experimentation has to be done once built. Where do treatments bass come in? Some say traps don't work, others say to put there yada. Yeah, you've got it on screen. What do designers all seem to align on in bass treatment theory? Well, my short answer is anyone that designs acoustics do not align. Generally, it's like saying, what do all hypercar manufacturers align on in terms of how their cars work and how their cars look? The answer is they don't. But it's a really, really good question that I think could be the content of an entire future cast to discuss.
I agree. I need to discuss with Ben on talking about this one because somebody else was talking about calibration, and I think this kind of plays right into it and the fundamentals and things to think about when you're going into this. Mike, I don't think we can give you an answer in this short amount of time, especially being conscious of Peter's time, because I know he said he wanted to keep this to an hour. But I am going to talk to Ben about potentially making this an episode or potentially having Peter back on and him addressing this. So, or all three of us, who knows? We'll see where we go.
The
That is
calibration one's interesting. We've talked about in CDO standard circles for years and years and years about, is there a case for a calibration recommended practice? and we've always gone, crikey, that's
Mhm.
that's a can of worms, because so much depends on what tools you have at your disposal,
Yep.
how those tools work, how good you are at using those tools, how experienced you are, what other nasty things is going on in the room. It's a really, really, really huge thing. My only calibration recommendation is, number one, do as much as possible in the physical domain.
Yep.
And when it comes to
Fully agree.
calibration, do as little as possible.
Fully
You know,
agree.
a light touch is generally better than a heavy one.
I look
And
at the
when I'm
calibration as the seasoning to the dish.
when I'm calibrating, if I can't get to 90% within about 95% within about 3 hours, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
You know, if I can't get a really, really good result quickly, there's something fundamentally wrong with the room or wrong with the system that you probably then need to go back and fix. And the other thing with me and calibrating, I know other people can. I don't know how they do it. I just don't know. I just can't do it for more than 3 or 4 hours at a time. My
Mhm.
ears are toast. I can do 3 or 4 hours worth of measure, listen, adjust, and then I have to put everything away,
Decompress.
go for a beer, come back the next day and carry on.
Yeah. So I wanna reiterate, I don't think Peter is saying that you have to finish a calibration in 3 or 4 hours. It's just if you can't reach a decent result in that time, you probably need to address something else that's going on before you get into the calibration. Am I saying that correctly for you?
You are, and what I'll also exclude is the measurements. So, for instance, if I've got I'm making up some numbers, a 17.14 subwoofers in a waveforming array,
Mhm.
dot 8 speaker array,
Yeah.
it's probably going to take me a good 2 hours to do all of the Trinov and waveforming measurements.
If not
So
longer.
I
Yeah.
take yeah, I take that out of my 3 hour period. If
Mhm.
once you've got those measurements, within 2 or 3 hours, you're not at a point that you're thinking, "This is really, really great. I
I'm
can
getting somewhere.
probably get
Yeah.
some more out of it, but I'm gonna come back tomorrow with fresh ears." If you
Yeah.
can't get to that point relatively quickly, there's probably something fundamentally wrong.
Okay. Well, Peter, as always, it's always a pleasure having you on. It was a good topic, I think, specifically for you to join us on. Always value your insight. Are you going to be at CEDIA?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you're coming from across the pond, so I always ask. You're
It's
with us at the sound room, correct? Yeah, you are, because that's an Officina
it's
room.
it's an exciting show because we, as Officina Acustica, we have a product release,
Yeah,
which we're quite excited about. It's kind of
I'm
a soft
excited about it.
launch, but from a CEDIA perspective, there's going to be quite a profound. I'm not going to call it an announcement, but we're going to be starting talking about something that's going to be very, very, very cool for the future.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you enjoyed today's stream and podcast. If you like to watch us live, if you're watching this in the VOD, you can catch us. Just look at the live section for any scheduled streams. If you need help with equipment, have questions, need design help, feel free to reach out to Ben or I. Our contact information is in the description below. Peter, thank you again for joining us. It's always a pleasure having you on. You and your lovely hair is something that I gave up on long ago. But thank you, everybody, for joining us. Stay safe out there. Enjoy those home theater journeys, and we will see you guys in the next episode. See you later.
Lovely to be here. Stay safe, everyone.